Okay, shifting gears now, moving away from project management into the concept of the foundations in business research and business thinking. There are principles here and authors here that you need to understand if you're going to be an entrepreneur, a consultant, a business leader. There is a shorthand associated with knowing who the great thinkers and the great theories are. On Canvas, I've provided you with The Economist's Guide to Management Ideas and Gurus. It's a good start. I'm going to go through in the next several sets of videos very quickly some of the basic principles of business theory and the business thinkers. You need to read more. In this first unit, we're going to talk about management and strategy. And you can't talk about modern management without discussing Peter Drucker. And just look at what he has written in his lifetime. It's staggering. He is considered to be the father of modern management. You need to at least have a basic understanding of the important things that Peter Drucker had to say. In the concept of the corporation, Drucker tracks the point at issue to challenge its historical as well as its logical basis. The theory of monopoly, Drucker writes, is still widely accepted as gospel truth, rests on the assumption that supply will always be limited, whereas demand will always be unlimited. And this was written decades ago, and it still seems to be an article of faith for a lot of business, for a lot of pricing, for a lot of strategy that organizations undertake. In his book, The End of the Economic Man, Drucker comprehends the sense behind the seeming irrationality of fascism's appeal by acknowledging the historical context of its ideas. Remember, he grew up in a dramatically changing Europe. According to Drucker, the Great War and the Great Depression destroyed Europe's already shaken belief in an economic system that was autonomous, governed by rational laws, and productive of both freedom and equality. With the inherited rational worldview of classical economics shown to be bankrupt, fascism took powerful hold on the European mind precisely because it was irrational. That is, it offered a non-economic basis for individual status and rank. Now, I put this here and ask you to reflect upon the world of Donald Trump. And are there parallels here? Drucker writes about Keynes. Keynes' work was built on the realization that the fundamental assumptions of 19th century laissez-faire economics no longer held true in an industrial society and an economy that was founded on the availability of credit. It aimed at the restoration and preservation of the basic beliefs, the basic institutions of 19th century laissez-faire politics. Above all, it aimed at the preservation of the autonomy and automatism of the market. The two could no longer be brought together in a rational system. Keynes' policies are magic spells, formula, and incantations to make the irrational appear rational. In Technology, Management and Society, Drucker writes that there has been a massive overall change in the nature of technological work during our century, a change in its structure, costs, methods, and conceptual underpinnings. Let's hear a little bit more about Drucker.
Hi, this is Brian. Welcome back to Philosopher's Notes TV. Today, another great book, The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. The Effective Executive, subtitle, The Definitive Guide to Getting the Right Things Done. It could also be called The 5 Practices of Effectiveness. We've got the 5 practices here, which is how Peter Drucker organizes this book. Peter Drucker, of course, is one of the leading business thinkers of all time, the father of modern management, arguably the greatest business thinker of the 20th century, and an incredibly productive, prolific, and lucid writer. Really enjoyed the book. I read this in preparation for Productivity 101. As always, Philosopher's Note, bunch of big ideas. We've got 5 of my favorites here. Let's jump in. The effective executive. We want to be effective, not busy, is one of the key themes. And we need to realize that this is a learned and learnable skill. Drucker makes the point that in his 45 or whatever it was, decades of experience, he had never seen a natural, effective leader or executive. It's always learned, and we learn it the same way we learn anything. Practice, practice, practice is what he says. Again, the 5 practices here that we will take a look at now. He wrote this book in 1967, to put it in perspective. And it is as timely now as it was then. So the first practice of the effective executive is time. Drucker makes the important point that time is our most precious asset. You can lose a lot of different things in your life, and you can get that back, right? You can lose some resources or cash, you can get that back. You can even lose your health a bit, you can get that back. Once time is gone, it's gone, period. So he says the first thing we have to do is optimize our time. There are 3 components to optimizing your time, Peter Drucker style. Here they are. The first thing is to track, which we're going to talk about in a moment. The second thing is to manage. And then the third thing is to consolidate. So most people, when they decide they want to optimize their time, what do? They say, okay, well, I want to get this done, so I'm going to do this at this time and then this at this time. They immediately start planning their days and their time. And he says that's not the wisest place to start. What you want to do is you want to start by tracking. Bust out a piece of paper and pay attention to and start noting where your time currently goes. And you want to know a couple things. First, the moment you start tracking anything, your improvement in that domain immediately goes up. So for example, you can have people enter a lab and give them a pedometer. Simply having a pedometer will make I go old school with that, will make you walk a mile more than people who don't have a pedometer. Simply measuring something improves your performance in that domain. Now, the other thing we see when we start tracking is we see just where our time is going, and you might see that you have a lot of time-wasting activities. And you might not be working quite as much in the deep work mode as you think. So that's our first step, is we track where our time is currently going. Try this. If you've never done this before, you haven't done it in a while, bust out a piece of paper, starting from right now, track your time. Even just doing it for a day or 2 or 3 will shed incredible insight on what you're doing. And again, your improvement will go up, your performance will go up immediately because you're not going to want to write down 3 hours wasted on the internet. Or I checked email for the 200th time today, right? Again, same rule applies to tracking your time, tracking your nutrition, etc. Track it, and then what do? You manage it. The number one way you manage your time and the way you manage anything you want to optimize is eliminate the stuff that isn't working. Eliminate the time wasters in this context. So you tracked what needs to go. That needs to go. That needs to go. That's a total waste of time. Or I could have that person, someone else do that. That's important. That's important. Prioritize. You start managing your time after you track it. Then what do? The third thing is you consolidate your time. So Drucker tells us, and we'll talk about this more in concentration, that once you've tracked your time, you've eliminated the time wasters, then you try to create the largest possible quantums of time you can. And for Drucker, that's not 90 minutes. So we talk a lot about 90-minute time blocks, oscillating on and off. For Drucker, it's half days to 2 weeks of focused time. If you want to be effective, you need large quantums of time in order to be effective. You can't be paper cutting yourself all day long. So that's the 1, 2, 3 of time management, Peter Drucker style. Track, manage, consolidate. That's the first practice of an effective executive.
I'm going to stop it there and move on, just out of time. But you've got the URL, please go and watch the entire program. Deming. I mentioned Deming a little bit earlier. Deming was famous because after World War II, he went to work in Japan, and he was taken there by General Douglas MacArthur, and he was tasked with rebuilding Japan's industry post-war. Many in Japan credit Deming as one of the inspirations for what has become known as the post-war economic miracle, and he's generally regarded as having implemented the quality movement in Japan. He argues not. In his autobiography, he said that quality already existed at a deep cultural level in Japan. He just helped them to apply it to business. And still today, the highest award in Japan for quality is called the Deming Medal. You would also perhaps have heard about the Deming Cycle. The Deming Cycle is plan, do, check, act. Not unlike what Drucker talked about, where you first of all have to measure what you're doing before you're able to manage or amend that. And so that would be the checking and acting components of the Deming cycle. And so Deming talks about the need to plan what you're doing, do it, measure it, and then adjust accordingly, and keep on going. Deming refers to 7 deadly sins: the lack of constancy of purpose, an emphasis on short-term profits, evaluation by performance, merit rating, or annual review, the mobility of management, running a company on visible figures alone, excessive medical costs, and excessive costs of warranty, fueled by lawyers who work on contingency fees. These are the things that Deming says are what is killing industry in the Western world, with a particular focus on America, of course, which was his home, where he was an academic after his experience in Japan. You've probably heard of the movie Cheaper by the Dozen. You probably know the more recent versions of that. Well, actually, it came out a long time ago. The original version was written by the 2 children of the Gilbreth husband and wife team, who, along with Frederick Winslow Taylor, were the proponents of time and motion efficiency. So Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, husband and wife team, they were engineers in the early part of the 20th century. Lillian carried on the work after the death of Frank in 1924. Their main focus was on the fields of motion study and time study, combined with interest in psychology or efficiency of work. The Gilbreth theory held that there was one best way to do any task, and efficiency could therefore be improved by finding this one best way and replicating it throughout the manufacturing process. The management theory of the Gilbreths can be summed up by: reduce the number of motions in a task to increase efficiency, focus on the incremental study of motions and time to understand an entire task, and the goal of increased efficiency is both increased profit and greater worker satisfaction. Quite interesting. F.W. Taylor, around the same period of time, he was a mechanical engineer who sought to improve industrial efficiency. He was one of the first management consultants. Taylor was one of the intellectual leaders of the efficiency movement, and his ideas, broadly conceived, were highly influential in the progressive area of American business. He summed up his efficiency techniques in his book, The Principles of Scientific Management. A bit more modern, Blue Ocean Strategy is a theory from a book published in 2005, written by Professors Chan Kim and Renee Mauborgne, professors at INSEAD and co-directors of the INSEAD Blue Ocean Strategy Institute. They studied 150 strategic moves spanning more than 100 years and 30 industries. And they argue that companies succeed by creating blue oceans of uncontested market space, as opposed to red oceans where competitors fight for dominance. The analogy being an ocean full of vicious competition turns red with blood. What is the best unit of analysis of profitable growth, company or industry? The fundamental question, without which any strategy for profitable growth is not worthwhile. Porter argues very strongly for measurement of industry. These authors, however, justify with original practical ideas that neither the company nor the industry is the best unit of analysis of profitable growth. Rather, it is the strategic move that creates a blue ocean and sustained high performance. Tom Peters, mentioned him earlier. First year published in 1982. He was a McKinsey consultant and went out with Bob Waterman and wrote this book called In Search of Excellence. They came up with 9 values: a bias for action, active decision making, getting on with it. They argued that in their research what they found was that successful companies made decisions quickly. If they made a bad decision, they made another one to get on with it. Facilitate quick decision making and problem solving tends to avoid bureaucratic control. Be close to the customer. Learn from the people served by the business. Autonomy and entrepreneurship. Fostering innovation and nurturing champions. Productivity through people. Treating rank and file employees as a source of quality, which you'll hear a lot from Sir Richard Branson. Hands-on, value-driven. A management philosophy that guides everyday practice. Management needs to show constantly its commitment by being hands-on. Stick to the knitting. Stay with the business that you know. Don't go off and do other things because they look profitable but you don't know anything about them. Simple form, lean staff. They argue that the best companies have very small headquarters staff, a very low overhead, that form follows function. Simultaneous loose-tight properties, autonomy in the shop floor activities, and centralised values. Okay, next we're going to talk about innovation.